for Tuesday, June 4th, 2019 is called to order. Clerk, please take the roll.
Calling the roll, Ms. Baker.
Here.
Ms. Simon. Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Schrein.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Thank you. Is there any public comment?
No, Madam Chair, no one is signed in.
All right, and I ask everyone to look at the minutes. Do I have approval from the May 21st meeting?
I'll make a move.
Second?
Second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No opposed, hearing none, minutes are approved. All right, Madam Clerk, please read the matter referred to committee.
Ordinance number 2019-0007, amending section 402.01L of the County Code to modify the definition of relative as it is used in the county's Code of Ethics.
Thank you. We are back to discuss this topic on the 219-0007, and if I may ask the Law Director, Greg Hugh, to come forward and give us an overview of a proposed substitute that we should all have in front of us.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Last time, when this was discussed at your meeting 2 weeks ago, there was a version of this that amended the definition of family for the purposes of broadening, if you will, the universe of folks who can be supervised by an employee. I listened to that discussion, and it sounded like folks were a little bit uncomfortable with how it was being approached, so I came up with a slightly different approach,
Okay.
which was to just amend the section of the code that deals with supervision. So in this case, what I've done is incorporated the definition of family that the Ohio Ethics Commission uses, and it simply says now that the supervisor can't supervise somebody who fits that definition of family, except for the fact that I think the Ohio Ethics Commission version of this says anybody related by blood or marriage who is also in the household. I took out that blood or marriage clause, so now it's just certain people plus anybody who lives in your household in this current version, or this proposed version, would not be eligible. You couldn't put a supervisor over that person who fits in that universe.
Right.
So I think it's a little bit more strategic, I think, or a little bit more surgical approach to this rather than just amending the definition of family, because that's actually, or not family, or relative.
Right.
That definition is used in 3 or 4 other places in the ethics code as well. So I thought this was just a little bit easier way to approach what you were going after here.
Okay. Do we have questions on this proposed? The only question I would have, although we could accept, why don't we go ahead and accept the proposed substitute? May I have a is there a second? All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Hearing none, it is now accepted. So let's have a little bit of discussion on this. From what I read, and you can correct me if I'm mistaken, it by changing it from relative to family and from it being exempting of all the spouse's relatives, if I'm thinking this through, this would mean that the supervisor's wife's sister or brother, which would be to the spouse his sister-in-law or brother-in-law, would be exempt and could be under that supervisor's direction.
Correct, if they don't live in the same household.
If they don't, which I wouldn't think a sister-in-law or brother-in-law would,
Yeah, but
for the most part.
nowadays you never know.
Yeah. So, to me, that's a little concerning.
We could certainly add that level of family relationship into the definition. This way, again, it's only affecting the supervisor role or the
Right.
supervisor definition. If you want to take that approach, we could do that pretty easily, I think.
Are you gonna propose that?
Well, if we propose that, then we would need to come up with that list of what would be exempt. Am I right? Yes. So that's not something I think we can do without maybe giving it some thought as to how far down. The way that we have now, what's been brought to our attention is a second cousin of the supervisor. And that's pretty distant, so I don't know how far down that list we finally get to the second cousin. I do know that there is a need to fulfill the position that's there, given the circumstances that's come to light. So we, we could consider, we could make this a temporary change. I mean, there's a lot of different things we can do in order to get past perhaps the problem that exists as to why we're even asked to talk about this
Certainly.
language.
But, I mean, I could certainly have ready for your next, or even the next council meeting, I could just, someplace in here, just insert sibling of a spouse, you know, the spouse's sibling.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to figure out how to get you where you want to be.
right. So it would be anything below a close relationship from a spouse's sibling. That's what you're saying.
Well, I would, into the list that's in there now, I would add a spouse's sibling, which isn't in the list now.
Anyone have any concerns or suggestions? Or-
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
Section 1, relative, am I looking in the wrong place? Because it does define a relative as a spouse's sibling.
That's still, that hasn't changed, but if you, the proposed substitute from the law department, we, instead of amending that, we amended the section 403.05B, that just goes to supervision. I actually have some cheat sheets that might help.
You know, we'll take anything you have copies of, we'll take a look at it. It is important language that we really need to make sure we understand before we vote to change it.
May I ask a question?
Sure, go right ahead, Councilman Miller.
My question is, what the status is of the problem that brought us here in the first place? Are we ready to make a hiring if this situation were resolved?
Madam Chair, the council, my understanding is the sheriff has someone that would want to put in on an interim basis into this role that's in question right now. Because as you know, the sheriff will be retiring. So the consensus internally is that the sheriff, when a new sheriff is hired, he may want to choose someone else for this role. So that way, but this approach would allow this individual to serve on an interim basis and also be eligible for the position if the sheriff so chooses, the new sheriff so chooses.
We're looking over your,
Madam Chair, while you're looking things over, I have a question to the law director. So is the issue if the spouses are separated and the spouse of the employee has a sibling living with him or her, that we would want to add that to this list? Is that what the issue is?
I mean, I think that was kind of one of the thoughts was if the spouse
They're
is
separated.
separated and living in another household,
Yeah,
then a sibling of that spouse would not be eligible to be supervised with what we were just talking about. But
if we add that.
If we add that, but the
If we add
version
that.
that you have in front of you now would permit that.
Correct.
Yeah. Unless they're living in the same household. Right.
Right. So this is only if they don't live in the same household that we're contemplating.
Correct. Correct.
yeah. I guess the relationship, if I'm understanding this language correctly, is that the director's wife's sister, who does not live in the household, but is working for the county and under the supervision of her sister's husband, right? I mean, I guess
Yeah.
I'm looking at the relationships of how close is it when we hire people, that the whole nepotism reasoning behind not wanting too many family members or any family members that are close
Right.
is is creating an environment that could make it difficult for that supervisor to do his job.
Correct.
So whether it's a sister-in-law, or whether it's a brother-in-law, whether it's the cousin or son or daughter of the wife's, I mean, where do you draw the line to say, that's just too far out to worry about?
Right.
I mean, that we're really being ridiculous when we say that's, and this second cousin could be that ridiculous line. I'm not sure that a sister-in-law or brother-in-law is a ridiculous line. I think that that's pretty close to perhaps interfering with what a supervisor objectively will do in his job if there is a problem of discipline. That's where my issue is.
But Joan, just to be clear, though, this isn't about discipline. The amendment that I've put in front of you doesn't affect that section. That's a 40503A, I think. And I just kept this in the supervisor section so that we wouldn't have to worry about that the discipline, hiring, firing issue. So, but it's still, but I don't disagree with you that when you're talking about supervising a brother-in-law or a sister-in-law.
How does this section, if we were just to approve this section, how does that impact the discipline of it?
I believe, and I've got an HR guy here to correct me if I'm wrong, that the supervisor would have to recommend it up the chain. All right. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
But
He nodded
the
his head
first
yes.
step in discipline is the supervisor recognizes that the activity is an action to which it requires or suggested discipline. So I'm not sure. I think we were talking about angels on the head of a pin, that the discipline process would start with the supervisor.
In most cases, probably yes.
Well, there's no, I mean, the supervisor is the eyes and ears of management in any organization, and they're the ones that would see an action that requires discipline. And so without them making the suggested discipline to include, I would assume, a recommendation of discharge, that anybody that's sitting at a level above that would be relying on that supervisor to make their best business decision. And they would more than likely, assuming it's not illegal or immoral or unethical, support the decision or recommendation of the supervisor with a supportive action. So it starts with I would think. At least that's historically what I've ever seen about how the supervisory track would follow. So
But
to say
I
that
don't
you
disagree
aren't
with
talking
that. Right.
discipline, it is the first step of any disciplinary action, I would
I would
think.
think in most cases that's probably correct.
And I guess I would follow the chair's point of view that it would be really tough to, on a supervisor to be disciplining a brother-in-law or sister-in-law, and then sit down at Thanksgiving dinner that year and chit-chat and say, hey, how you doing? How's your job? Oops, forgot. I was the one that recommended your
Might make
discharge.
the table a little less crowded, right?
Yeah, it might make for, and now please pass the mashed potatoes,
Right.
it might make for a tough transitional conversation, so.
I
think it's better not to why even introduce that possibility? I mean, because it's a natural flow.
yeah. So I think, committee members, I'm not sure that this is a place where we feel comfortable being, but we also have an issue before us that we need to fulfill a slot that is an important slot to fill. And with the sheriff leaving us, and relatively soon, we have now 2 openings that we need to fulfill in order to keep this county running. I would ask Chief Carney to come forward and give us where you are in your hiring process, and maybe give us some background as to why it is that if we are uncomfortable here, where else can we be, or at what level can we be, and even if it's a temporary assignment or appointment that gets you through the difficult part of being able to do your job.
Sure. Thank you, Councilwoman. Brandy Carney, Chief of Public Safety and Justice for the county. So as yourself and the law director stated, we currently have the chief deputy, the number 2 for the sheriff's office position, which was vacated by George Taylor. And we were in the process of interviewing that position. Myself and the sheriff and HR had interviewed, and we got down to a handful of candidates. We were completing a final interview last week with those candidates, and the sheriff had also announced his retirement. So we did speak with those candidates. They actually, some of them reached out to us. We reached out to some, and they themselves had stated that they questioned whether we were moving forward or putting things on hold because they too felt that the new sheriff coming in should have somewhat active role or just be able to sit on the committee and make a recommendation for their number two, it being such a significant position within the organization that's so large. Which is understandable, waiting a few months. It'd be different if it were years, but a few months in doing that. But the difficulty, as you said, is that leaves us with 2 vacancies, the top 2 positions, and just having an interim candidate. We have to name someone interim to be over the organization. And so that's why we'd request if we're not able to move forward with the discussion timely, which is understandable here because we want it to be accurate and right, if there's a possibility for allowing an interim status. And so the internal candidate could hold the interim position, and they, as he said, they would be eligible to apply for the number 2 position as they already have, but then the new sheriff would have a say in who that position would ultimately be selected.
When is the resignation of the new sheriff?
The sheriff's retirement is active August 2nd.
And you don't believe that between now and August 2nd, we could perhaps hire a new sheriff?
I don't know about hiring, but I can say we are absolutely immediately starting the process of getting a position posted. We want to make sure that's accurate, but I can say we already spoke with the executive and HR staff about that process, so that is an immediate move that we're working on, Mrs. Chairman.
In the best case scenario, I would think, is that we would have our sheriff stay, and this is June 4th, we're talking August 2nd, and that we would be close, if not ready to hire by the time we got to August 2nd, so that he could hire then his second in command.
Absolutely, that would be ideal. Thanks to the sheriff for allowing us this time before taking, 2 weeks for retirement, being part of, he too, being part of that process. And so there wouldn't be too much of a low period. That's correct also. We still need somebody interim. Again, the sheriff is here, especially if there's, a nobody in after he leaves because, things get delayed sometimes or for whatever reason. But again, having a number 2 or just appointing that leadership position, even interim, would be really critical to such a large organization with everything going on.
Right. What are the thoughts, members, of having the law director perhaps giving us some language that is a temporary language to get the chief through this 2 or 3 or 4 month interim, trying to fulfill both positions, whether or not the appointment that's made now or suggested sticks to future. It may just be the few months, who knows? But is there any thought of allowing for this candidate who seems to be who we have in front of us and willing to step up into this position for a specific period of time until the sheriff is hired and can choose his own? We may have to revisit this if he chooses the person that is the temporary appointment, because we still have the family member or relative language that's in his way. But at least it gets you through a couple of months.
And if I could, Ms. Chairman, the individual that this came to light and that we're talking about here is one of the 2 captains within the sheriff's office. So the highest, just below the chief position on the law enforcement side, but he also started in corrections. And so he's been within the corrections organization and our jail organization. So he really does have historical knowledge and value for the entire sheriff's office operation.
Any comments?
Chair, I know I just stepped in.
Yes.
Forgive me, was the name of this person publicly shared publicly?
Through the councilwoman to the chairman, at the last meeting, it was discussed, and I don't know if the exact name, but there's only 2 captains within the sheriff's department, and so I think it had been stated, and there was also an opinion that the state had put forward, so.
Yes, Councilman?
The risk of making an exception for a short period of time is that the individual then is caught between a rock and a hard spot. When, unless you say that this is grandfather for this one individual for the life of their work environment, they would be here for potentially 2-3 months, whatever length of time that temporary is. And now we've actually boxed them out of a position where they could be going someplace else for a job. So I think it's very difficult on the individual too.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, we would also, their current position, we wouldn't backfill. So in this interim, as they held that interim position or title, we wouldn't backfill. So again, if a new sheriff were to come in and pick somebody else, or they did not want to participate in this process anymore, they would still maintain the role or position that they're in right now.
Perhaps a suggestion would be to give them a dual capacity role that gives them a dual split title, where they retain their title of their existing position with full acknowledgement that they would resign once a sheriff is appointed from this position. So it eliminates the conflict, in that the new sheriff is there then free to then at that point find their own successor for that number 2 position.
I understood. I would just say the interim, they were aware if that were to occur, they would be doing their current role as well as the new role.
Yeah, but I'm suggesting that they are still, their primary role is the role they're currently in. We're not going to make an exception for the policy other than for a temporary basis, in which case, once the new sheriff is appointed, that slot then becomes fully open. And eliminates the conflict issues as far as the nepotism. And then it becomes, and I can think only that the sheriff would like to be able to appoint their number 2 person, and that this person has stood up and done it for the good of the whole. And I think that I would be comfortable with making that kind of exception that says they would resign once a full sheriff is appointed from that second position.
Excuse me, I'm a little confused, I'll have to say, because if he's serving in an interim basis and we somehow figure out a carve out for his service as an interim, then he would not be eligible to be in that position permanently.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm not sure what you're suggesting would solve that problem.
As a temporary basis, is he not currently in a position right now that you said you would not post for?
Right, and when you're interim, that's how an interim works. Your one title is held, your duties aren't given to someone else, but you're also serving in the other capacity as an interim.
Okay, I guess I was under the impression that you could also, if you moved him over to that slot, you could have opened up his current slot if you chose to.
No, not as an interim. No.
Okay, all right. Well, my point was that he would not be eligible for the permanent slot.
Right,
That's correct. Mhm.
right.
Is that what you have written? Is that your interpretation of where you have this written right now? That he would not be eligible for the permanent position?
No, this
this
would make
would-
him eligible.
Yeah, that's my point.
Make him eligible for the permanent position.
And then you have a permanent potential conflict on as far as the nepotism issue.
No, there wouldn't be a conflict if this is approved.
Oh,
because
well,
this
that's
eliminates
true.
those,
Yeah.
But, and at the same time, if you want to insert that phrase, or sibling spouse, that'd be a pretty easy thing to do that would address that level.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the supervisor's second cousin. Is that where we're specifically talking right here?
If I could talk about the county employee,
Yes.
it's his wife's first cousin.
First
Ms.
cousin.
Chairman, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Is this the only case? Are there other cases within the system?
That's an HR question, Mr. Chairman. I'm not, or Councilman, excuse me. I haven't heard of any. We had just suggested last meeting that It might be few and far, but being such a large county, for larger organizations, the sheriff's office has multiple people, in law enforcement, it's common for people to continue to be in law enforcement throughout families. And so I think it's just these leadership positions that are over the entire agency, such as the chief and the sheriff, because otherwise there's a lot of individual agencies or departments underneath them. For example, sheriff's office has a corrections end, a law enforcement end, and so that's why it's not an issue right now. But the problem is when you're in these few leadership positions, you're over that entire organization. And so I think it's few and far, but I'm not aware of any, but
Is there
ask
anyone
HR.
Is there anyone in HR that's here today that they could actually speak to it and say? And speaking specifically to the county jail and the sheriff leadership, are there any other that
Good
you're aware of?
afternoon, Councilwoman. Council Michael Brown, the Manager of Talent Acquisition and Employment with the county. So that question, Councilman Jones, is something we could definitely look into. Not to my knowledge, do we have any other positions that are like this? Again, as Chief Carney stated, with the leadership positions that we have within the county, it's more when someone is over the entire agency that we will see this happen. We monitor it when it's a lower level position.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm not sure I understood. What do you mean monitor? What does that mean? You have people that are supervising that would, relatives that would be in violation of what we have here on this piece of paper?
No, sir. When I say monitoring, that is we have actual nepotism forms that are filled out in regards to that. We look at where that is, and we actually review that paperwork for those employees.
Okay.
It seems to me that time is what we're battling here. Time and two open positions, potentially. One is open and one is potentially going to be open. So is it reasonable perhaps to give it some time? You're aggressively searching for a sheriff. The position is open, although I think the sheriff should be the one that is choosing the people below him. Is allowing you perhaps a little time to see if you could fill that sheriff's position, and if you are able to do that before the August 2nd deadline of his resignation, that this would not be a problem.
Councilwoman, I can just say, as I stated, we did already have the conversation with selecting a new sheriff. However, there was discussion about a possible national search, and so making sure that the right individual, and so that process could take some time. Again, we'll immediate start it, but could take some time. And while I myself would love to get someone hired within a month, I can't say that that'll actually happen.
Do you have something? We're at a crossroad here. We're really not comfortable with the current legislation that's put before us. We understand the dilemma that you're in. We don't want to make a mistake in, doing something that we all are not comfortable with.
Madam Chairman, if the committee so likes, I can take another stab at coming up with a version of this. It says, for example, that the supervisor can supervise a relative as defined for a period of up to X number of days after their initial appointment, or something like that, as a carve out, if you will, so that.
Yeah, I think the most palatable, not the perfect picture, but the most palatable, it seems that if we could have this position be temporary, the person agreeing to that temporary position takes it that way. He or she is also assured that they could fall back to the position that they're now performing. And if we could somehow come up with that scenario, that would be, I think, a little more palatable for everyone here to know that we are remedying an existing problem that you're trying to run the jails, and we're trying to make sure that we keep what we think is important when it comes to relatives working together. Can you think a little bit of time? Can you come up with something you think can
Certainly.
kind of
I
carve
think
that out?
The only caution is, though, then this individual wouldn't be eligible for the job on a permanent basis if the new sheriff says, yeah, this is my guy. he wouldn't be eligible.
This person that you're considering that is now currently with us would have to know that going in.
If I could just say, Madam Chairman, and I don't know, but the interim status, when we had talked previously, he knew that the current sheriff or now a new sheriff would come in and it might not be him and he'd go back to the old role, or it might. But I don't know about their interest if there's not an option to even, have their hat in the ring for the permanent position. I can't speak to that.
I can certainly understand that.
Yeah.
And perhaps you can go back and, for the good of the county, he may, agree that I'm doing this because I know it's, I'm trying to do my best to help the county, but know that it's temporary because of the situation of the relationships. And
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, and I apologize for cutting you off, Ms. Chairman. If that were the case, and this can absolutely happen, but there's, a possibility, that there could be an external sheriff and an external, there's some internal candidates, but these were some of the leadership that there are two, newer individuals coming in too. There's something to think about, which can be difficult also for an organization as well as for, such a large organization and things going on.
all right. Well, unless the members have any other words of wisdom here, I would say let's let you go back, as chief and law director. We're looking to you for some guidance. Go back. You've heard our concerns. Come back in 2 weeks. Tell us what it is that perhaps you have talked to with the people that you work with and those that are interested, and come back with some language and work together and see if you can bring us something that, hearing where our issues are and understanding what your issues are, we can come together.
Okay.
Does that sound all right to everyone here?
Nan,
Yes.
and I apologize for coming in late.
Yes.
I'm not clear on what the concern is from council side.
The concern is that the new language that the law director has given us exempts everyone on the spouse's side of relationships. So if the supervisor's sister, let's see, let me get this right. If the supervisor's wife, his spouse, sister applies for the job, that would be the supervisor's sister-in-law or brother-in-law or any other relationship that is below that. And we're not comfortable with the supervisor's sister-in-law being directed by a brother-in-law or sister-in-law. That the closeness of that is too close. And that's the way this 403.05 nepotism language is written. And that's where our concern is.
May I ask a question?
Go right ahead.
Again, if you've already shared this, what is the impetus for this change? What is your reason for what is happening that you need to make this legislation?
Sure, Councilman. The reason this came to light is the sheriff, when George Taylor had retired in March, we had wanted to name an interim for that position, one of the current captains within the sheriff's department, and his wife's first cousin is a correctional officer in the jail. So there's many layers between them, but now he would, as an interim status, be over that entire sheriff's department. So his wife's first cousin is where this came from.
So this would allow those two to both exist are they in the county jail or where are they?
Within the sheriff's office
Sheriff's
structure,
office.
what was proposed by the law director, yes, it would allow that. The concern is also hearing that it would also allow for something as close as a sister-in-law, not even first cousin. And so that's what I'm hearing. It might be too close now.
Or even a wife? So what you're
The wife
asking,
The wife would not be permitted.
wife would not be allowed?
Right.
Spouse would not be permitted.
It would be
Children,
everything.
grandchildren,
Right.
anybody who lives in the household.
Okay, I don't know if this is possible. Are you asking for an exemption simply for that case, or just this opens it up across the board, right?
Right.
If it currently exists in other areas, that it would then allow that, and in any future examples as
It
well.
would. This is
So-
across the board. This is not specifically for an issue that they're dealing with. This would be across the board. That's why it's an important decision that we make here. It's not just to solve one particular important problem. It is across the board. You know, third cousin, or did you say first cousin? First
ma'am.
cousin of the
First
supervisor.
cousin.
First cousin of the spouse, right?
First cousin of the spouse.
First cousin of the
Yeah.
spouse. Yeah, I mean, how distant, I guess, you know, that's a question too to ask members. How distant is it that makes you uncomfortable? That may be something that we also should be considering. The way that it's written now, I think it's too close. Maybe you could write it in a way where it's distant enough, even across the county, it doesn't seem to be a problem. And, you know, maybe I just think maybe if both of you could put this together, you've heard the concerns that are expressed here. We do want to help you with what it is that you're dealing with. We want our jails to be run and run correctly. So, if there's nothing else here, I think we'll let you go and do what you do best and come back to us with something perhaps that's more palatable. Maybe float it to us in the interim and let us see it ahead of time, and maybe we can then chime in on it among ourselves before we hear it for the first time here.
Thank you, Chairman.
All right, if there's nothing else, we'll let this go for now.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
both.
All right.
All right. We would also like to bring forward during our time here today a Corey Swaysgood, who will be giving us his internal audit report. I thought that in talking with Corey over his report, I thought it was important that we get a firsthand walkthrough of what he's reporting to us, and I think that you'll find it informative and maybe give us a chance to answer some questions or ask some questions and get some answers. So Corey, go right ahead.
Thank you, Councilwoman Baker. Corey Swaysgood, Director of Internal Audit. Good afternoon, council members, and thank you again to Councilwoman Baker for allowing us to come in front, or making the request for us to come in front and present our annual report to council members. And I also wanted to say thank you to all the council members for their support over the years.
We appreciate you being here today.
So the reason for our annual update to council, this is the third year we did produce a report that we sent to council members. And this year, we sent this report to council members in April, about a month ago. And this is the first year that we are presenting the report. The audit committee is required to, according to their internal charter, which is approved through the audit committee, to do an update to council. And a couple years ago, we agreed, or at least the audit committee agreed, to do an annual report, write up a report and send it to council members and leave it up to council if they would like us to come in for a presentation. So I have up here right now the agenda for today. The internal audit charter, the audit committee charter, the internal one, requires us to do the update to council and give a update on the evaluation of the committee's performance in the prior year, which would be 2018, and also to give an update on the Department of Internal Audit's highlights in 2018. So I believe you all have the report in front of you.
Yes, we have your overview, and we also have a copy of your audit committee report.
Okay, all right, good. So the first two items on the agenda, the purpose of the audit committee and the current members and the evaluation of the committee's performance, I will introduce you here to Michael Buzerall, who is our committee chair. He will come up and present on the two items, and then following Mike's presentation, I will finish the last two items, which is our Department of Internal Audit highlights in 2018, and then we also track our performance statistics that I will also share with you.
Great, thank you.
So here is Mr. Buzerall.
Hello and welcome.
Thank you. So again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present this information to the county council. I'm honored to represent the audit committee today. So we have a great audit committee. I'm going to go through some of the members and explain a little bit about their background, but I'm kind of honored to actually represent them today. So again, I'm Micah Busserall. I've been on the audit committee now since April of 2014, and this is my 4th year of actually chairing the audit committee. I do want to introduce, there is one of the other private citizens who are on the audit committee. It's Keith Libman, who's back there, if you want to say hi. So Keith is one of the members, and I'll talk a little bit about his background.
Good.
So let me just, I want to talk now about really the purpose of the audit committee. I'm just going to read it. It's actually in your document, and I'll just add some words to that. So the audit committee and the internal audit department is established by the county charter. The committee's mission is to provide internal auditing for the county executive, county council, and other county departments and organizations funded in whole or in part by county funds, and making sure that you're providing taxpayer services in an efficient and effective manner. So kind of what's important for that is to understand that kind of the role of the audit committee and the role of the internal audit department is pretty diverse, because the county is certainly providing lots of funds and lots of dollars to a lot of quasi-governmental organizations located here within Cuyahoga County. So the way that it was structured really does provide a lot of kind of diverse responsibility to the work that the internal audit department can ultimately do. So the committee plays a key role in fulfilling the county's governance responsibilities related to accounting and financial reporting practices, internal and external audit functions, and the county's overall control environment. So as indicated, our responsibilities are pretty broad. And so if you just listen to that language, it certainly provides a lot of responsibility to the work that the internal audit department does, because there's so many components here at the county. There's so many organizations that are collecting dollars. There's so many organizations that are dispersing dollars. You're a very large, complex, and diverse organization. So it's really key that this function is actually being provided. And I do believe with the way that the county charter was structured and the way that the audit committee is responsible for fulfilling our mission and how the internal audit department actually reports up to the audit committee, I do consider that to be a best practice. There are kind of other governmental entities that have audit committees, but that have internal audit departments, but the reporting structure for the internal audit department is not as independent as it is here for Cuyahoga County. So just the way that it's structured and the reporting requirements and kind of the makeup of the audit committee, I think is considered a best practice here. So as far as the makeup of the audit committee, so there are actually 5 voting members of the audit committee. 4 of us are private citizens, and then there's also Trevor, who's actually the representative of the council president. There's 2 non-voting members, the county executive and the county fiscal officer. Our meetings are scheduled. Our meetings are active. We have great attendance and great participation during our meetings. So the names of the actual folks on the audit committee, you can kind of see that there. So myself as the chair, I mentioned Trevor, Gary Seamus, Keith Libman, and Yvette Itu. Unfortunately, we're losing one of our members of the audit committee, Gary Seamus. His last meeting is actually going to be our upcoming meeting on Friday. He has just a ton of outside responsibilities that he's actually undertaken recently, so he's not going to be able to fulfill his role moving forward. As far as a little bit of the makeup of the audit committee, you see a little bit here on the chart. So of the private citizens, all of us are CPAs. Yvette is actually a practicing attorney. Keith and Gary are actually partners or retired partners from public accounting firms located here in Cleveland. So we do think kind of the technical makeup of the audit committee is really the right structure to do the work that we're doing. Trevor plays a key role in the audit committee, both his experience here and understanding the kind of the operations of the county and really helping Corey kind of navigate Corey and his team kind of navigate the work that they're doing here within Cuyahoga County. So it really is a kind of a great structure. And again, I just want to use this as an opportunity to publicly thank all the members of the audit committee for what they do. As I mentioned, we have we're required to have 4 meetings a year. We do that. We're required to meet with the external auditors. We do that. We're now allocating time to ultimately find Corey's replacement. So there's a lot of time commitments that we have as the audit committee members. And again, I just want to thank everybody for the role that they're playing in helping us do what we need to do. So I don't know which button I. Okay. So this page here, this really reflects the kind of the requirements that we feel that we're responsible for doing based upon not only the county charter, but the audit committee charter and the internal audit charter. So as has been identified here, there's actually 18 kind of responsibilities that we think that we have based upon the audit committee charter. And as the summary slide indicates, we're actually in compliance with all of those. What I would like to do, I'm going to bounce you around just a little bit, but if you go to the other report that Corey has in front of you, starting on page 4, I want to just go through some of the more important components here of what our requirements are and just have you get a little bit of a sense of the other responsibilities that we have. So the first one actually is what we're doing today, and that is to make sure that on an annual basis, we're providing kind of a summary and an update to the county council so that you understand kind of the key work and the important work that Corey and his team is actually doing. So, you know, as Corey indicated, we started this process a few years ago, and again, thank you for the opportunity to present it today. The second item here talks about the external auditor. So this is actually your external financial auditor. So as this indicated, they actually directly report up to the audit committee. So we have the responsibility to interact with your external auditors as I know you do when they come and kind of present the work that they're doing. You know, we do that. They come to us before they start the audit. They explain their scope. They explain new pronouncements that the county has to implement. Talk about the budget, they talk about the timeline, and they ask us if we have any concerns or issues that they think they should be addressing as they're doing their audit process. The third item, which again I think is one of our more important ones, but the committee shall review and approve all significant findings in internal audit reports prior, ideally, to the release to the public. So what this says, and we do this, is every report, once it gets to a certain stage in the way that Corey's team actually develops it, he submits it to the audit committee members. We all have an opportunity to review, assess, evaluate, question, critique, whatever the terminology is, just to make sure that ultimately we approve them and we ultimately agree with what Corey is actually and his team is actually producing and releasing. On the next page, we have the responsibility to review and approve the annual internal audit plan. So the county goes through really a best practice in identifying the whole risk assessment process that the internal audit team has developed, ultimately identifying certain components that Corey believes should be part of the audit plan, and then we have the responsibility ultimately to approve that. He also provides for us some potential other options so we can kind of evaluate that. But one of the important things that we do is we approve it, then we ultimately try to make sure that Corey is getting through it by the end of the year, and any revisions that occur and the reasons for those revisions are approved by the audit committee. The third one down, again, once the audit has actually been, the financial audit has actually been released, we do have the external auditors come into the audit committee and provide for us you know, how did the audit work? What were any of the issues that had been identified? How were they doing on time as far as getting through the audit? But more importantly, any of the internal control weaknesses, the material noncompliance items, the management letters, all that gets reported to the audit committee. The county has developed a very good system to kind of keep track of the items and whether or not the county is actually implementing in them. So we actually make that kind of a normal course of our responsibilities. The last bullet point here, unfortunately, we're going through this now, but it's really our responsibility if there is a vacancy in Corey's position to do the review and the evaluation and ultimately the recommendation to the county council of who we suggest to be the replacement for Corey's position. So unfortunately, we have to do that starting pretty much immediately. And then the last item, it's on the last page, but kind of in the middle there where, you know, we really monitor whether or not Corey and his team are actually kind of complying with auditing standards that have been created. And so why obviously that is important is that make sure that the quality of the work that Corey and his team are ultimately producing and releasing hit those appropriate standards. So again, that kind of shows, you know, the items and the responsibilities and the fact that we've been able to fulfill those. And I guess since I'm here, I did want to just publicly thank and acknowledge Corey for the great work that he has done, not only in his time as the internal audit director, but I knew Corey before he was the internal audit director, and so he has done just a great job in all of the work that he has done here on behalf of the county. In my opinion, this Department of Internal Audit has become a best practice. So it was really started by Val Harry as the first internal audit director. This is a pretty new process here at Cuyahoga County, and I just think in a very short period of time, starting with Val and then continuing under Corey, I really do consider it to be a best practice. So, you know, in areas of that, I talked about the risk assessment, which is the right way to do it. I talked about the audit manual, which is now in place. I talk about the quality of the reports that Corey and his team ultimately produce, the impact of the recommendations. In my mind, those are just some of the examples of the great work that he does. Another key, you know, indicator of the progression of the internal audit department is people are actually asking Corey to come in to do audits of their department. I mean, if you think about that a little bit, having not only departments under the county executive requesting his services, but organizations outside of the county executive requesting those services. I think that just gives an indication of how the organization has grown and progressed and really become a valuable resource here. Passing of the peer review in 2018. So that did not get, in my opinion, as much fanfare, I think, as it probably should have. But there was a significant amount of work that the department did in making sure that they could pass the peer review. For those of us who work in the profession, that's a huge accomplishment. I believe that Cuyahoga County is only the second internal auditing agency that's actually passed a peer review in the state of Ohio under the standards that have been established. And really what that says to folks, in a very simple way of saying it, is they're doing everything the right way. I mean, that's really ultimately what it says. They come in and evaluate everything that you do, and they check everything off against a checklist, and they make sure that you're adhering to all those standards. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Corey and let him know he's going to be hard to replace.
Do we have any questions for our guest? I just want to say thank you. You know, there's a lot of work going on that we don't always see firsthand, and this audit committee is one of them. You come and you do your work, and you do it quietly and professionally. I will also add, this is all volunteer. You do not get compensated except for hopefully the reward you get for doing the work that you do and knowing that you're doing a good job. So thank you for your efforts and your committee, and of course Corey for all the work that he's done and his guidance. But we do know that you are out there, your committee's out there, and we appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you guys are superstars.
Just no question.
Here's the superstar.
You don't have to be nice to me anymore, Mike. But seriously, though, thank you, Mike, for all of your support and all of your expertise that you shared with me. You really helped me to grow over the last few years, and all of the audit committee members, including Keith back there. I know he's only been here for a short time, but thank you. Okay, I will move on to Department of Internal Audit's highlights. So the slide I have up here is actually on page 7 of the report that you should have in front of you. And what I plan to do is just go over all of the 9 engagements that we released last year, just give an overview of kind of a summarization of what our scope was, what our objective, and the results. And if I'm aware of any follow-ups on those results, I will share those as well.
All right.
So as Mike pointed out, we do go through an annual process to determine what we're going to audit in the next year. So we perform a very comprehensive, especially the first couple of years, risk assessment on the whole county, and that not only includes executive agencies, but that includes non-executive agencies. So that's how Mike has said, we've gotten requests from other agencies outside of the executive to perform audits, and that risk assessment, I think, has helped us to get more involved in communication with those non-executive agencies. So we perform that risk assessment towards the end of every year. We meet with the council president and the the county executive to ask if there's any requests. And with the request, we kind of put everything together, score everything into what we call an auditable unit, an audit universe, and we determine what's the highest risk of the county. And like Mike said too, we do present what we believe our audit plan is for the next year. And we also give the audit committee additional audits that we believe could be a part of the audit plan. So at the end of the day, it does come down to their approval. So there is a lot of discussion during this meeting, and I mean, meetings can take up to 3 hours at some points, and especially this meeting is very important. And it's a good process that we have in place, and also with the audit committee being very involved with our work has been a huge help. And again, I appreciate all their time, especially being voluntary.
Absolutely. Corey, in looking at your chart, and to understand it thoroughly, you have your release dates and then you have your recommendations issued, which means that these are recommendations of improvement.
Yes, so looking at the chart, I'll go over that briefly. We have a list of each engagement and follow-up that we've completed in 2018. The dates, the reports were released, and then also the third column over is the number of recommendations that we issued. So these are all specific recommendations for improvement, and these are the recommendations that we follow up on. So the first table of the recommendation issued, hopefully next year, usually our follow-up process is hopefully within 12 months, year and a half, we will follow up on all those recommendations. And that is what the below table is for the follow-ups that we were able to complete in 2018. The below table has the number of recommendations issued, and then the way we score our follow-ups is if they've been fully addressed, partially addressed, not implemented, or if they've been withdrawn, meaning that there was a policy change, there was a change in the function department that really our recommendation doesn't apply anymore. So that's what the recommendations are. And then we also keep track as we go through our reports, our findings, and make our recommendations. We keep track of potential savings and potential recoveries. And what potential savings really means is any type of policy change that could increase or increase revenue, decrease expenses, and based on the recommendations that we've made. And potential recoveries being any recoveries that we feel that the county should consider pursuing.
So these recommendations can be from minor recommendations to perhaps something that is more critical that would have to be done. So the number really could be a little misleading, only that they could be small items that you're just saying, this, you could be doing this better, it's a quick remedy, we're gonna come back and check, and yes, you have done it, to those that perhaps are more in the weeds and could be more at risk than others. So I guess here, Corey, if this is comfortable for you, if we can take a look at perhaps what we should be paying attention to as to perhaps what is a little bit more in the weeds, where you're not comfortable as to even your second look at that they have in fact accomplished what the recommendations ask them to do. I know that we have on page 9, and I don't want to, am I all right with you? Do you want to
yeah,
gradually
go
get
ahead.
there, or are you okay?
No, go ahead, I can go back.
Is there anything you want to comment before?
No.
Okay. So we understand that on page 7, your release dates, your recommendations issued, and then the follow-ups. If we get to page 9 of your report, we get more of a language of what it is that you're checking and what it is that you're a little more concerned about than most. Can we just we could follow through here on the cause and then results, and then see where it is that you are, and that we can, even after you leave us, have an understanding of where we should be asking the questions next time.
Yes, and this is what I try to make pages 9 through 12, which I try to give a brief summary of each audit, which is what I plan to kind of present here today as well. And within the results of the summary for each audit, I tried to hit the bigger areas, more significant findings.
Right.
But I would say that prior to release, I usually send the reports to council about a day or two before, and areas to focus on there would be we have a report highlights page, and that's where
Yes.
it's about a page or two, where we would put the significant findings in that area.
Great. That's,
So I do plan to go, if that's okay, I do plan to go over every engagement that we released, and then also some areas, our results, mainly the significant findings, and if I have any follow-up with that, I can.
okay,
I don't
and
know
if
if
we
that's
have any
it.
questions as Corey goes through this, we may interrupt you with a question.
Yeah, just,
One already.
Oh, that's fine.
what you intend to go through is the 2018, as least as I understand it, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But the release date of the sheriff's office follow-up reviews is the one that concerns me probably. It indicates that over 20% of your recommendations were still open, at least if I'm understanding your numbers correctly. So back to the chairwoman's question out there, obviously with the sheriff and everything that's going on within the sheriff's office being of concern today to us, with a 20%, over a 20% recommendation list, how many of those are in that serious category, just going back to that? Because obviously we're vulnerable right now on a whole bunch of fronts over there.
So these two follow-ups, which I'll get to, is the general operations, which is more on their fiscal side, and the property room, which is in their narcotics department. And to answer your question, Councilman Tron, we try to shoot for the 80% to 85% range. I think that's pretty good on a follow-up, especially when you look at there's 139 recommendations made. If there are any significant findings in those, the 20% that hasn't been implemented, I will communicate that to the audit committee. And for these two audits, there weren't any significant
Okay,
findings, a lot of
so
them.
the fact that there were 28 open items, that's actually exactly 20+% of the original recommendation. So we don't need to worry about the fact that there were 20+% still open.
Correct.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I would be worried if there is one significant finding in there that
Yeah,
needs to be
that's why I was going
implemented.
to be worried if
Yeah.
there was 2 or 3 in that out of 20%, right?
Yes, and I can say from those audits that most of them do relate to policy,
Okay,
having
thank
a
you.
written policy on those.
Good.
Okay, so the first audit that we released in 2018 was an audit on Benford's Law. And Benford's Law is, for anyone that doesn't know, it's basically a statistical analysis. I won't go into all the details on really exactly what it is, but our data analytics system can run this analysis for us. And we intend to make this a recurring audit, especially with the ERP. And really this Benford's Law kind of flags what they call suspicious items for us to look at, to really kind of give us some numbers, some payments, mainly on expenditures that we should probably take a deeper look at to see mainly if there's duplicate payments. So we did perform this in we completed this in 2018. It was on 2016 transactions, but we did find some duplicate payments, but we did notice that the accounts payable department detected them and corrected them. So that was a good sign. And we only were able to sample, we weren't able to sample as much as we did just because it was a new process to us and the accounts payable department, but we did find some control weaknesses that we made a lot of recommendations to accounts payable to correct those, which they took them and started to immediately correct them and trying to implement them with the new ERP here. So that was ended up being a good result to an audit. And in future years, which we do have this audit again on our audit plan for this year, we will be testing more related to the Benford's Law analysis since we have a better idea of how this all works.
Good. That's good to know. Thank you.
The next audit report release is the employee reimbursement audit. We released this in 2018. It was a review of employee reimbursements in 2016. So here we pulled a sample of the highest reimbursed employees for the year and high dollar individual transactions. We tested these reimbursements to ensure compliance with county policies and that adequate controls were in place to properly approve and support these reimbursements. The good news is that the fiscal office addressed most of our recommendations here and are going to include any recommendations that they couldn't address in the ERP. And I would say that after our audit or during our audit, the monitoring controls on county employee travel and most really significantly improved. And most importantly, you probably remember is that the county had adopted a new travel policy at the end of 2018. So I think that was probably the most significant thing, the good thing that came out of this audit. But we did identify, it was only about $3,400 in recoveries, but 2,400 of them were recovered during the audit. And some examples of these recoveries include reimbursements that were paid against county's former travel policy. For example, some meals were provided by conferences and optional activities at conferences were reimbursed that weren't allowable. We found some hotel and flight cancellation fees that we requested that should be reimbursed to the county or recovered. And also one employee was reimbursed for a flight when the county already paid for it for about $382. That item has not been reimbursed or
May I
recovered.
ask you, Corey, given, and I know my colleague too on Board of Control, where we get quite a few travel asks, are these where you're finding perhaps they should not have been, or are these other places other than Board of Control approval?
Well, our audit included reimbursements or travel prior to the Board of Control approval. But those would have been items that we would have looked at if they were reimbursed. We just pulled the employee
You
reimbursement.
did the whole thing.
And we did make the recommendation to actually start using Board of Control to improve these items, these travel items.
You did, okay, good to know.
Question.
Go ahead, Councilman Miller.
It says here, potential savings of $225,365 were identified, but you then mentioned a much smaller number. What's the difference between those two numbers?
So potential savings are not recoveries. The recoveries are what we believe the county can recover. Potential savings, especially with these audits that we released last year, we did take into consideration the new ERP, and with the new processes that we recommended that calculated, even if it's just more time for employees, potential savings there, and also with the time it takes to review travel. I know there's someone in the fiscal office that takes a lot of time to review travel, and just thinking about the potential savings there, and if he can spend more time on something else that needs to be done. So these won't be like actual dollar, you won't see these as dollar savings, not all the time, but we, based on our recommendations, the new ERP, any new policy like the current travel policy, we make that calculation. Okay, any other questions on the employee reimbursement?
No, good to see that things that are being asked to change are changing, and, mistakes happen, but if we can understand them and correct them and move on, that's what we're here for.
Yes, that's good. Okay, the next report release was on we performed a conflicts of interest review back in early 2018. At that time, the county executive did request my services to perform a complete review of county contracts for the past 3 years to find if there was any indications of conflicts of interest. There was a lot of discussion around this with the audit committee. Eventually, with the audit committee's approval, I did perform an assessment on the process related to the disclosure and detection of conflicts of interest. This was also done in conjunction with the Inspector General, and the Inspector General and I both researched best practices, and the Inspector General did send out about 150 surveys to 50 different government agencies to kind of get an idea of what's the best practice around the country. And really what came out of this is that the county is following best practices, and really any improvements to this process is more of an enhancement for the county. And I think this was a good review, but there were some recommendations that came out of this that I sat down with Inspector General and Office of Procurement. And one of the big things I think that came out of here is that the Inspector General was going to consider making a searchable database of anyone that fills out a conflict of interest form. And that way, especially the Office of Procurement can review that database during the procurement process, especially if there's a new vendor, or even every vendor, to see if there's any conflicts related to those vendors.
All right.
But one other big piece here is that there never seems to be a 100% solution on identifying or preventing conflicts of interest. So you can only put in policies and controls in place, which is, I believe, the Inspector General and the rest of the county that has that currently.
Good, thank you.
The fourth audit report released is the audit on the procurement processes related to IT contracts. In the 2017 audit plan, we developed a list of recurring annual audits, which I mentioned the Benford's Law would be a recurring audit. We determined high-risk areas like employee reimbursements, like procurement, contracts, provider monitoring on grants, and we developed this list to perform an audit in a different area on these recurring audits. One of the items that we selected is actually a select category of contracts. And after our 2016 risk assessment, we included that item, select category of contracts, to be IT contracts in the 2017 audit plan. Our objective there was to ensure the procurement process for each contract complied with county and state laws, and adequate application and general controls around IT, IT system, which happened to be OnPace at the time, was in place during the procurement process. We also reviewed payments on the contracts to ensure proper approval was obtained through council, through board of control, and at the department level. We physically verified existence of hardware purchase as well. We tested these contracts and invoices between July of 16 and December of 17. We did identify internal control weaknesses related to the procurement process, segregation of duties issues, and noncompliance with the Ohio Revised Code and even the county code. So I'm going to go over, there's about 4 or 5 items here that I would kind of say were significant findings in our audit report. We did test 96 contracts and purchase orders. We noted the effective date for 29 items occurred prior to receiving board approval. We also noted that 30 items out of the 96 tested did not obtain all required review authorizations prior to board approval. This is what they would call walk-ons. These types of items are generally presented to the board as being an immediate need to procure emergencies. Also, 49%, 47 of the 96 received board approval as RFP exemptions or sole source contracts. And reminder, just these are all IT contracts that we looked at, which means that they were not competitively bid. In discussing these concerns with the executive's office, they were already concerned with this process, with the number, and at that time they said that they would address it. Now, we haven't performed a follow-up on this yet, but just to let you know the communication between the results of this in the executive's office.
May I ask you, Corey, how important is it in an audit report that prior approval, that a contract is already released and operating before approval? We will get, I know in Board of Control and maybe some others we see in committee, that we're asked to approve something that's already 4 or 5 months in the contract. And even though we ask specifically, has anything been given to that supplier in payment, and the answer is always no, from all the times that I remember asking. How important is it, though, that we try to get these contracts asked at the time or before they begin?
I would say that's very important. And just during our audits, we did recommend that they do, especially a lot of these emergencies, if they're true emergencies, we recommended that they develop an emergency workflow and develop a whole process on that in the on-base system and even with the ERP here, because I know there are emergencies like with HHS, with the sheriff, with the jail would be a perfect example right now.
Right.
And it would be more of an emergency workflow that you wouldn't have to go through every single step, but it would be all the necessary steps to get to council board of control approval.
I think I think there's a difference though between an emergency of a boiler breaking or an HVAC going down or a garage door and so we need a walk-on to approve something that perhaps may have already been repaired. But I guess I'm asking more about the contract, that's a 5-year contract, that we're 6 months into the contract and we're now being asked to approve it. And even though it hadn't been paid yet, how significant is that in an audit report where it's flagged and looked down upon as that's really not good business?
Yes, I would agree with you, and that's why we pointed these out in the audit report. And
Okay.
I mean, really, I think it comes down to planning out well in advance to get the contracts going and get them approved well in advance.
The walk-ons that we see, sometimes they are an emergency and other times they're just needed. I don't know, doesn't always seem to be an emergency. It's not an emergency where we have a child at risk. It's an emergency where there's maybe glass or something that needed to be repaired and we need immediate funding for that. I mean, the difference is, how would you handle that? I don't think you can ever get away from a walk-on for an emergency that may not be at its highest level, but still would need to be something that is approved perhaps after the fact. I mean, do you give some consideration for that in your audit?
I don't recall specifically, just because when we did this was a couple years ago, but we gave consideration. I mean, we review the reason, but ultimately reporting on it, just because there wasn't, I mean, the process that was in place, or at least that was documented, we were following that process, and there wasn't that. I mean, I know there's an emergency, then there's ones that appear they could be emergencies, but our recommendation really is to consider, documenting that so everyone, so council knows, so board of control knows about the reason why you're doing it this way.
And lastly, would you give a difference to those contracts that need state and federal funding along with county funding, and then because of that, it drags the time that it takes to get it to the date before the contract starts? We hear a lot of that, where we were waiting on federal or waiting on state, and because we had to wait, we are now 6 months late in asking for you to approve this contract. Is that inexcusable in the audit world of what you look at?
I couldn't answer that knowing, just because this is what, we just looked at IT contracts here, and I don't know if that was, I don't think that occurred during our
Okay.
review here. So I don't want to answer that without really reviewing contracts around that or the whole process there.
Okay. As we read your results here, you identified some internal control weaknesses, and we see a pretty big number here of 200,000 in recoveries that include missing routers and a potential overpayment to an IT vendor. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes. So when we performed our inventory of IT items purchased on some of the contracts and POs that we looked at, we were unable to locate 20 wireless access points, which are routers. And I thought I could point one out to you here, but I can't. And the cost of those routers totaled approximately $15,000. The administration initially decided the cost to recover outweighs the $15,000 recovery, but I did receive an email today from the law department saying that they are going to look back into this.
Okay, that's good.
So we did identify, and this even goes way back to when this county building was built, that it's kind of a long story, but there were 20 wireless access points, routers that were purchased when this building was built, and then they lost 20 of them. They lost all 20 of them, and then the vendor replenished them. sent 20 more, and the payment was not made to the vendor until 2016 for the extra 20 that were sent. When we did our review, we pulled all of the routers that were on the county's network through the IT department, and it came back that the original 20 appeared to be here. The 20 to replace those 20, the original 20 that were missing, were not here. So our recommendation is for them to go back and recover the 15,000 from the vendor.
So is that 15,000 of the 200 total?
Yes, it's part of the 200.
So what else is in that 200 to make up the majority of those dollars?
So also part of the 200 is a payment that was made to One Community back in 2016. We reviewed all of the support, all the documentation that we could get from IT, which was from One Community at the time, and now One Community is Everstream. And we tried to reconcile the amount of work that One Community did back in 2014, because One Community is claiming that they had unpaid services that they didn't get paid for. So we reviewed support from One Community, any type of invoices that we could get our hands on, and we recalculated how much One Community probably should have been paid, and it was about $120,000 less than what they were actually paid.
Yes, go ahead.
At the time of that finding, who was in charge of One Community? The time when all that took place? Or was there any correlation? Pardon?
At the time of the finding, or the time of?
No, at the time of the incident that you indicated, you said 2014 potentially went back to?
It went back to 2014. I actually don't know who was in charge at that point.
Was our CIO ever involved with the leadership over there?
Yes, I believe it was.
Was it during any of that period of time?
It was, I don't know the exact date. It was before 2014 is all I know. I don't recall the exact date when.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. It was, again, a couple years ago when we did this, but it's, yeah, I know he was involved with.
You didn't find any correlation between One Community and our leadership over here?
Other than the former director was the CEO at a time, but I believe it was before 2014.
Okay, but you're not sure of that?
Not 100% sure.
Okay, thanks.
So of the 200,000, we've accounted for 15 and another 120. That leaves us a balance of around 70,000.
Yes, there was a contract with a vendor called OneLink. Back in 2011, the county contracted with OneLink to develop the procurement database, which is OnBase. And part of their contract was to publicly post contracts on the county's website, which was supposed to be in compliance with County Code Section 501. During the audit and review of the website, we noticed that not all contracts were posted to the website under that County Code section. And so OneLink was fully paid for their contract, which was about $600,000. And there's a piece of that contract that they did not fully complete. So we made the recommendation that they consider recovering that. And that's also a piece that the law department emailed me today and said that they are going to review that. And same thing with the One Community payment, that all three of those items they're going to look into.
So
How much money on that one item?
That's that would be the rest, so that's about 50,000, 55,000. We didn't know the exact amount, but we took a percentage of the work that they did to determine. We didn't want to say you should recover all 600,000 because they did do a lot of the work.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, as of today, the 120, the 15, and the 55 are now, by the law department, will be looked into in trying to recover it.
Yes,
Did I hear that
I know there
correctly?
was consideration around when we first presented on these findings, but today I got a follow-up from the law department saying that now with the new law director too, that they're going to look into this more.
Okay, that's good. Now, that, of course, does not have anything to do with the APHIS, the 300,000 that
No, it does not.
is also in question,
No, that has nothing to do with this.
but it's in IT.
Yes, correct.
Any questions from our members on that? All right, well, I'm glad to know that that has not been forgotten, and
Yes.
that we are taking an active role in understanding, first of all, that it exists, and secondly, that we're going to go after what we need to do. So thank you for that.
Follow-up question.
Go right ahead.
This may be out of your area of expertise, but maybe not in follow-up. The question is, do you know whether the problem with the contracts database has been corrected now, and are all the contracts on the contracts database?
Yes, I do know prior to release of our audit report, which was in August of 18, there was a complete listing on the county's website. There was a lot of work done with IT, with OPD, with I believe it was on base with the vendor to make sure this happened and make sure the county was in compliance of this code section. So I do know that it was posted to the website back in August of 18. I can't tell you for sure if it's still going on, but at least at that point they were in compliance.
Okay.
All right.
I do also want to mention that just related to the 20 missing routers, prior to our audit being released, the IT department with the help of the innovation department did develop a comprehensive inventory policy. That was one of our recommendations. And we do have an audit on our 2019 audit plan that we plan to perform a IT inventory audit to make sure that they are in compliance with that policy. So hopefully that would be a good review.
And the 20 missing routers, because we have what we thought we didn't have, but they were installed at the beginning, the 20 missing routers are, we don't know where they're at.
We do not know.
So we're asking for reimbursement of that.
That's our
payment
recommendation, is for the law department to consider reimbursing or getting reimbursement from the vendor.
from the vendor. Okay. Okay.
Okay, the next audit released in 2018 was an audit on parking services. During this audit, we performed really a cash collection review on all of parking services. Our main objective there was to ensure parking services had adequate controls in place and policies in place around their cash collection process. This was both during their daily operations and during special events, since they collect a lot of cash before Cleveland Browns game. And I would hope that that revenue would be going up this year. The parking services management and the public works management was very cooperative and really worked with us from day one, especially in developing a comprehensive policy and procedure manual. We did notice some control weaknesses and segregation of duty issues. For example, the same employee collected, secured, reconciled, and deposited cash daily and for special events. So we made some recommendations around there, and actually the state auditors was going to make recommendations around it, but since we kind of got in there first and made these recommendations and they made the changes right away, it did not get into the state audit report. We did identify about 113 terminated county employees in parking services system with an active status to park when they should have been deactivated, but as soon as we found this issue, they were immediately fixed. And then we noted some kind of minor reconciliation issues with the cash that was collected at the ticket machines in Huntington Parking Garage and over at the juvenile court. And we did a lot of walkthroughs with parking services, especially with juvenile court. To the Huntington Parking Garage, minor reconciliation issues were fixed because it was a newer system at the time. So those ended up being resolved before our audit was released. But the juvenile ticket machines were outdated, and we did make some recommendations for them to update those systems, because after multiple walkthroughs and inquiries and trying to figure it out, they still had some reconciliation. I mean, it wasn't a lot. It might have been 50 cents one day or $1 next, but we really think they can benefit from upgrading that system.
Did you say earlier on that the person who collected, I can't remember the process you used, but it was all one person doing it from beginning to end, and you made recommendations as to how that should be improved? Was that
Yes.
taken seriously and that has been resolved?
Yes, it has been resolved, and that's also something that the state auditors found as well, or kind of noticed, but because they resolved it right away, it was not a part of the audit report.
Okay, good.
Okay.
It's
next
interesting,
report-
yes, with your follow-ups. Is that where you're going?
I have the Budget Commission policy review, which I wasn't going to spend a lot of
Okay,
time on that.
sure,
but
go right
we-
ahead, I'm sorry.
We did just a policy review, their policy procedure manual. We did a review to make sure that they were in compliance with state laws and that their policies were clear, consistent, and comprehensive. So we were very impressed with the policies and procedures put in place by the Budget Commission, and I really commend the manager for the work he did, and in also training his staff. Everyone was well aware of everything, so that was a good review.
Good.
The last three items are the follow-ups that we completed and released last year. The Treasurer's Office follow-up, just a little history. In 2014, we released a comprehensive report with about 30 recommendations related to the Treasurer's Office cash collection process. We identified cash security and process concerns during that time. In 2017, we conducted a follow-up on the 2014 report, where during our follow-ups, we performed limited review, limited work to conclude if our recommendations were implemented, because we can't really perform another audit on those areas unless requested, or we feel like we need to go back in and do a whole nother audit. During that follow-up, the first one in 2017, we noted that many recommendations were not taken into consideration, and we actually identified 3 more recommendations that they needed to implement. So this actually goes back to, I believe, Councilman Schron, you're the one who asked, but if we have any issues or any findings that are significant that aren't implemented, I did communicate this to the audit committee and to the executive, and the executive actually asked us to come back in and do a second follow-up, which is really unheard of, but with all the issues there and around the cash collection process, we agreed to come back in 2018, which is this report that we released.
So your report for 2018 is showing that you still see significant issues that have not been addressed. So it would take a third follow-up?
Well, in 2018, and this is where I have concerns with the recent IG's report that was released. In 2018, we actually did see improvement on their processes. What I do have concern with, because if you see from the 2 reports, I believe it went from 60%, 65% implemented, close to that 80% mark, 85. And the problems I had just looking at the Inspector General's report is that it appeared that some of our recommendations may have appeared while we were doing the follow-up, they were implemented. Mm-hmm. And now looking at what the processes were when the Inspector General went it back in about a year later after we completed our second follow-up, it looks like they kind of reverted back to the old ways, and especially related to child support payments.
So we're talking about a resident of Cuyahoga County coming in and making a property tax payment or making a child support payment, that in cash, that cash gets put into a box, and the box, according to your original, was not secured, and hand receipts were given, and should have been also entered electronically into the system so that the person making the payment is acknowledged for making that payment. So perhaps it's pending being able to see their child, and maybe it's based on a lot of things why they make that payment. Also, their property tax could be liens on their homes or whatever it is that they're coming in for, to make sure that it's logged that they're paying. So those types of payments that were not entered into the system correctly, in fact, it was pretty loose and in a cash box, not secured in the office where anyone could come in or out. What has, in your second time out, because first time you identified it, second time you're following it up, and we're looking at the follow-up, and I believe what you're saying is that you still don't see the kind of improvements that should be made, and that those that are making these cash payments are still vulnerable to having it stolen or not recorded or not getting a proper receipt.
Yes, and our audits back in 2014, which is where we performed our follow-ups on, we did have many recommendations around the child support collection process. And one of them was to create an agency fund because it is not recorded in FAMUS, the financial system currently, and to record them timely. So I think that would have possibly prevented some of this, and also to have one person in charge of collecting child support and securing the cash in one drawer with only one person having access to that and reconciling it at the end of the day.
So the recommendations that you made that did not get followed through a second look, I mean, what do you suggest what needs to happen in order for us to correct this? I mean, what recommendation do you have, or have you given perhaps the executive at reach that level that we need to do so that we're not vulnerable to what's happened in this department?
So actually related to the child support process, I have been working with the IG, and since there are many child support collection locations, we actually met with the child support director over at Virgil Brown Building, and we developed what we believe would be our recommendations, which some did come from our former report. Discussed that with the director of child support, and she is going to reach out to every agency. And I have also discussed it with, or sent at least communication to the treasurer about what our recommendations are. The IG sent one to the clerk of courts, and we are actually performing an audit in the juvenile cash collection area anyway. So we have discussed this with them, and they are currently implementing our recommendations as well. So I mean, it's concerning. It's a little sad that it had to come to this point, but it sounds like everyone's on board to make these changes now.
So as we stand today, are you satisfied that these recommendations will be implemented, and that after you're gone and your successor steps in, that this will be something that the box is checked? Or is this something that we, as an oversight, need to perhaps follow up on before the next yearly report to find out whether or not this has been taken care of? I mean, where are we in this? This is a third look now, a third recommendation of making sure this is done correctly.
I'm satisfied with the point to where this has gotten to, all of the agencies that know about it, that it will be implemented. But I do think there needs to be a detailed follow-up, if it's our department, if it's the IG's office, to make sure this is implemented within the next year here.
Or how much time would you give this, given that they've had quite a bit of warning? I mean, this is cash. These are people's lives that are depending on this to be recorded so that they can continue with their lives, to visit their children, or, or make sure their kids are provided for. How much time is needed between now and the time that you would expect this to be done?
Well, to have better controls in place, and I do know just by speaking with Inspector General, the Treasurer's Office has put better controls in place. I don't think it's the best yet, but it should only take about a day to put better ones in place, and which I've been told that they have. But at least with accounting for it properly, recording it, and we made recommendations with the Harris system, the new tax system, and the ERP. So once that goes live, that's when that process should start.
When is that expected to go live?
I don't know when Harris is going to go live. I have not been told a date.
Okay. Would it be appropriate, I guess, for us to let a 30-day period pass between now and the time that it's brought to our attention, and 30 days to ask, has this been completely addressed? Is that, and the answer back in those 30 days should be, absolutely, we're on board, everything is recorded as it should be, and there is no issue.
I think that's appropriate.
All right, any questions from our colleagues on that? You good? All right, thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Okay, thank you. The last two follow-ups are related to the Sheriff's Office. Back in 2013, 14, 15, we did perform a lot of different audits within the Sheriff's Office. I think we came out with four or five different audit reports. In 2018, we did go back and perform a follow-up on the sheriff's general operations, which is mainly just their fiscal area, and the property room. And I was very satisfied and happy with the results there, especially related to the property room. That I don't know if council members know what occurred there back in 13 and prior to that, but the amount of work that the sheriff and the property room employees and the narcotics units did over the last few years is, I think, phenomenal. They were working Saturdays, Sundays, trying to clean up the property room, putting better controls in place around the cash that's collected as far as property goes. And
Good,
I was very impressed with what they're what they did in that short period of time.
good, good to hear.
Okay, the next slide here. Other highlights in 2018, there are 2 engagements that I'd like to go over that we are currently working on that were kind of started in 2018. One has to do with our benefits review. Just a little history, in 2016 and 17, we did release 2 audit reports on the benefits department. Within one of the reports, we identified over $1 million in claims paid to ineligible medical insurance subscribers. We also identified inaccuracy in payroll withholdings when comparing withholdings from employees' checks to plan selections or to approved premiums. Following the release of this report, the executive did request our assistance in 2017 and 2018, knowing that this still needed to be further reviewed. Mainly to review the accuracy of employee payroll withholdings to open enrollment selections, and also to review if there were any more ineligible medical insurance subscribers. We did find that there were errors, that these errors kind of continued through the payroll withholdings and ineligibility in the 2017 review and in the 2018 review. And due to that, and at the executives and benefits request as well, we are currently going back in to perform another review on the most recent open enrollment that occurred towards the end of 2018 there and effective this year. We currently are in the process of testing this year's selections and eligibility files, but we do note that there still are some concerns around the data, and it's most likely due to this GHR data refresh. We're kind of hoping that with the new ERP system, this would all be resolved this year. It'd be a clean review. So it's almost looking like next year, hopefully, is that we get those results. But we don't have a report yet, or we don't have our findings concluded, so I don't have all the details for that.
We have Councilman Schron has a question.
The health insurance plans, especially the ones that where we're providing this as an inducement to get other communities to join us, and did you test the validity of the modeling that we used to encourage some of these communities to come on board? Because it's my belief that they were not actuarially even close to being sound, and that we were not correctly gathering data about the claims experience and the history of these communities, and that we actually bought the business, as they would say, in the business of insurance, that they were not priced based on actuarial basis. Did we test those?
Yeah, and those were tested back with our original audits back in 15, 16.
Okay.
With all that was going on. And I wasn't the director at the time, but I was a part of that audit.
Okay.
And that's what we concluded in our audit report as well.
Okay, so that's the fundamental basis to why we've got problems in carrying along insurance, because we bought a bunch of business, and then we end up dropping communities at the 11th hour, and we got a bad rap, a bad name for ourselves because of the way we priced it and everything about it. Is that still rippling through to today?
I don't know if that's directly correlated with this, but I can't give you, I don't know for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Corey, the ineligible benefits that you have found in 2017 and 2018, and you're going to go back now in 2019, how broad is that? I mean, when we have someone who is collecting a benefit that shouldn't be, is there a clawback period to correct, and if we do claw back, how extensive is that, I mean, what are we looking at here as far as the broadness of checking it 2 years in a row and going back for a third?
So the impact on the ineligible employees, I will say during our 17 and 18 reviews, as we came up with our results, benefits did work on trying to get them resolved, especially the ineligible employees. So from my understanding, all of those have been deactivated from the providers, so they can no longer get benefits. But the impact on that, or the effect of the county, is going back to figure out, especially for the self-insurance portion of them, mainly medical, CVS, pharmacy, is figuring out were there any claims during that period of time. And that's something I don't have the results for you on that, but that's something that Benefits was going to work on and give us some numbers.
Any pension issues with those,
No,
that they weren't eligible for pension?
no, because that's related, that'll be related if they're getting payroll and having,
But those insurance claims that you're talking about, when they ripple back into the period in time when we were incorrectly taking on risks, that then rolls into your stop loss provision, which then bumps that up, which then causes a cost, and it impacts today's current beneficiaries because of what we did before out there. I at least
I could see that being a possibility.
my understanding of the way the insurance market works is that today's stop loss is directly reflected upon yesterday's claims.
Yes, and I know that they had, if I recall all this, they had two different types of stop loss policies, one related to the regional partners and one related to the county.
Yeah, and the regional partners is where we were really buying business, a book of business, and that's what's really rippling through to this.
Yeah.
Any other questions? We're good, Corey. Go right ahead.
Okay. The next item is the Enterprise Resource Planning Project, the ERP. And just a little history again, in April of 2018, at the request of ZIG, the council's consultant, and also the fiscal officer, our department did become more involved with reviewing the ERP project. During that time, we developed a scope of work, which included verification of adequate internal controls and segregation of duties review, and also to ensure safeguards are put in place on to protect confidential and critical data. Since then, we have developed two preliminary finding reports with medium and high risk findings. One from June of 2018 that was distributed in September of 18, and one we recently distributed a few weeks ago. The reports include 36 findings, in which 50% of them are currently unresolved, or we don't have any support to prove that they have been resolved. One thing I do want to note is that the 15 findings from the June 2018 report, we did not get any updated responses on those, and a lot of those dates have passed, which I requested at the time to get an update on those responses. Some of these concerns we believe relate to the role in the GHR data refresh, as we expressed concerns on change management controls and how HR data was converted and validated in the GHR system. Other things to note is that in both of our reports and all 36 findings, we do stress the need for internal controls, efficiencies, approval workflows, and security, specifically in 15 of the 36 findings, which all of these are unresolved, partially resolved, or based on the response, it appears that the risk has been accepted. I do also want to note that, and this was discussed with the audit committee at last meeting, that we did have problems getting access to an IPA system, which is an approval workflow system that we've been requesting since November of last year. And based on discussion with the executive's office, that this month the ERP team has gotten training on this system. So I'm hoping to hear from them soon that we can get training and figure out how the system works and do our review on it. But this was a system that was tested with the fiscal modules back in November of last year. So we were hoping to get an idea before some of these other systems went live and get a good review. Also, another item to note is since December of 16, I've actually inquired about a GRC module, which is a governance, risk, and compliance module. And since then, I've made a few more inquiries about if the county is going to implement this or at least buy it because I feel that it would be a good system to help demonstrate to external audits the county is constantly monitoring the control environment and correcting numerous issues, audit citations over the years. And just to read you a little bit about the GRC module, according to Infor's website, this module enables finance, audit, and IT users to share a common platform to independently monitor their key controls across all of their key applications. I do know some internal audit functions across the nation that use a similar system. The GHR component could set up automated controls for internal audits while ensuring policies are followed. And if a control does not go the way it should be, it's flagged. It's like continuous monitoring, not only for us, but also for management to consider using. When I inquired about this, we were told that there's no budget and they declined to purchase this system. And just discussion with the fiscal office and with the IT security director, they expressed support about purchasing this module. I don't know the cost of it. I've asked for it a few times, but this is a concern that still is in our findings as unresolved.
Yes, go ahead, Councilman.
So is this system that you just talked about specific to the ERP, or if we moved on and this is a broader control for the whole of the county's operations?
It's specific to the ERP. It's just it's an added module to the ERP. There might be other systems that you can integrate with it. I'm not sure, but
And what was the name of it again?
it's called a GRC, which is a governance, risk, and compliance module. And we did, back in 2015, when they did these demos, we did get to sit in on the demo of it, and we thought this was going to be implemented, and I think it would be a really good tool.
Corey, as you know, we've been watching the ERP pretty closely over the last, I hate time flies, but I think it's been at least a year or more since we've been.
Yes, it has.
Yes, monitoring this, actually, literally on a month-to-month basis. So, you know, unless my colleagues have maybe a different comment, I would like to see a list from you that states what it is that you are recommending and have not been to your satisfaction, given an answer or completed.
Yeah.
One of them would be the GRM module, but I heard some other things that you also asked for, and time has passed and you had heard nothing, not even we don't agree with you, or whatever it is that the comments have come back. We would like to see the paper trail or the dialogue of, especially since you'll be departing. What have you asked and what is important to our internal audit department that you think we should know regarding the ERP and how it's run? And I don't think some of these things that you've mentioned, honestly, I can't remember if it was on our radar or not. It doesn't sound like it, but if it's on your radar, then I would like to have an itemized list of what it is that you asked for, so that we, when we have these monthly meetings, can come back and say, this is brought to our attention, where are we? What's the answers? What is your opinion? Whether it's our consultant or whether it's the administration who's giving us those reports.
Yes.
Madam Chair, could we
Yes,
suggest
go
he
right
also gives it to Z directly? So
Yes.
that he can be our eyes and ears to
Absolutely.
make that request, because he will be a bird dog on those
Yes.
issues.
Yes, if you can certainly make sure to both, so that we know what it is that you're asking, but definitely he will be the person that we will count on to run this down for us. And if we had known, or maybe been more aware earlier, we may have been able to help you
Okay.
in
I
getting
can
the
give
answers
the
that you were
list.
looking for.
Okay.
When you get that, would you share it with all of us?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
okay. There's one item here that I've noted on a March 19th document that I have, and it's about the accrual in cash that went back quite a little ways now, and I think we were given the assurances that that had been resolved, but where are you in your investigation of whether the cash and accrual has been satisfied.
Yes, that was something I was going to bring up as good news there. Yeah, we've been involved with, even with ZIG and with OBM, on, we developed our own recommendation on how they should approach this, and OBM took steps to gather as much information as they can, as much data. And I know as recent as, it might have been Monday, I think, well, Greg was here. As recent as Monday or last week, he is keeping us up to date, and it sounds like he is getting responses from everyone as far as the hours worked on the project.
Okay.
So he's taking the time, and OBM's going to take the time to kind of split out capital versus operating and be able to report to council on how that looks like. And also on the budgeting side of accrual and actual, they have been working with IT. I think our recommendation was to bring that all the way over to OBM to do that. So there's been a lot of communication there. I'm not 100% sure on exactly where they're at with that, but we've been more focused on the capital versus operating for
Right.
accounting reasons.
We have to, right, it's been, right.
So that, I think that's good, making really good progress.
Okay, that's good to hear. Any other questions on that? All right, anything else you want to offer us on the ERP system?
I did want to note, at least on the fiscal side, beginning in November of last year, that we have been very involved with reviewing the security around each module.
Okay,
And that includes us looking at the roles and responsibilities in the system, looking for mainly segregation of duty issues, that the correct role is assigned to the correct screen and has the correct action view only update. And that actually came from Jack Ryan, who currently runs the project.
Yes.
He's been very helpful, and he's been including us in everything related to that security around, and also with his security team, which is Bob Knoll, Dan Hill, Stephen, and I really appreciate the time they've spent with us, and I think they appreciate the time that we spent reviewing the security. They've been very helpful and courteous of our time as well. And I think that's yielded a good result as far as the security goes. I know it's kind of pushed some of the modules back maybe a few weeks here and there, but I mean, Jack Ryan's attitude on that is to let's get it done right. And
good,
I think that whole process is going really well.
good. That's good to hear from you.
Okay, that's all for ERP.
Okay.
And I think you're past your time you wanted to go to, but
I think we're good. Have we covered pretty much what you'd like to have covered with us today?
yes, I did want to mention the external peer review, which Mike already talked about, as far as good highlights for our department. And the fact that we do complete annual risk assessments in the audit plan every year, and development, which Mike's already mentioned, development of our department's first ever internal audit manual, which is needed for to comply with standards and also to pass our external peer review.
Right,
And then I just have mentions of other services that we provide for county management, including any assistance that's needed from the fiscal office with the external financial audit, and also other departments. I mean, I get calls almost every day just asking a simple question about something. So that's other stuff
good
that we
to know,
deal
too.
with. And then I don't need to go through all of this, but this is just something we track on our performance statistics related to our actual expenditures compared to what we identify could be potential cost savings and recoveries. And I also have a graph here on our total recommendations over the years and the follow-ups that we have performed. Based on that, so we can say that 76% are fully implemented out of the ones that we have followed up on.
okay, good, good.
So that is all.
All right.
I have a question.
Yes, okay, well, now I've got the questions.
No, you don't have a question. It's just a compliment. My hat's off to you. It's a tough job, and you and the internal auditors and all your hard work, and then our audit committee itself, phenomenal job. This is, it gets very little, as you know. Accounting is not the kind of stuff that makes the front page of the newspapers unless it gets in trouble. So the good news is you guys have been doing just a phenomenal job, and I know I speak for probably my 11 colleagues. We wish you were not leaving this county because of the good skills you brought, and it would be remiss of me to just say, why are you leaving? Because your skills are needed here. And we really would love to keep you here as a dedicated eyes and ears watchdog that we need, because a good government only works with people like you, Corey.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman.
And I wish I could put a chain on your ankle down there and keep
Yeah,
you at this job a little longer.
Trevor already just tried.
Okay, well, the two of us can, maybe we both have chains, yeah, who knows?
Councilman Miller.
I would certainly like to thank you and echo the high praise and thank you for your dedicated service, which I think has made a fundamental, lasting, and positive difference on county government performance.
Thank you.
I want to ask about something that I haven't heard about in quite some time and probably predates most of what's in this report, which is that quite early in the time of the new government, there was a deep in the weeds problem that was identified in the clerk of courts that involved millions of dollars, and it had to do with people who were owed money following their court cases, and I'm just wondering if you can tell us. I presume you know what I'm talking about, and if you could tell us where that stands and if they've been able to go through and identify all the monies that are owed to various people and gotten them to the right people. Where does all this stand?
I don't have the answer for you right now. I mean, we did perform that audit in 2013. Actually, that was the first audit I was on when I first started here. I know our recommendation at the time was to go through every single case, every single court case, and determine what needs to happen, what money needs to be distributed to who. And I know it was going to be a long process. I would hope by now they would be done with that process. Sorry, but I don't have a good update for you on that.
Okay, well, we'll have to follow up with other people on that. Okay, thank you.
I will say, I think that this is an important enough overview that I would like to see this in this committee, if not once a year, but twice a year. I think that the semi-annual report is important for this committee to hear, and I think that the follow-up from this report is important to hear 6 months later. So just as you're going to get back to us on some of the ERP questions, and now that we're aware of the other things that are going on in the treasurer's office, and it just makes us more aware of what we should be paying attention to. And as long as I'm chair of this committee, we will ask your successor to come in here, if not once a year, twice a year, to make sure that we know what the important work that you're doing, and that we, it's only important if we know it. So I too want to thank you for your hard work, your committee's hard work, those that work with you on your auditing staff. It's work that doesn't always get recognized, but we, especially those that watch the numbers as closely as we try to, appreciate what you do out there. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Thank you, council members.
All set? All right, if I don't hear anything, any other business, we are adjourned.